Okay, hi there. In this video, I'm going to spend a few minutes, if it's okay with you, looking at some of the micro and macro aspects of an increase in government spending on childcare. Parents in the UK face some of the most expensive childcare costs as a share of average wages amongst high-income countries, averaging £150 a week for 25 hours a week, and something like a quarter of parents with young children find it really difficult to meet their childcare costs. It's a major cost for working families in particular. Now, the government does spend money on childcare, close on £4 billion. That's set to rise in the years to come as they expand parental entitlement to free childcare, including a 15 hours entitlement for all 3 to 4 year olds, extended entitlement for working families, and also for disadvantaged 2 year olds. The question I posed to my students in class just a few days ago was assess some of the micro and macro effects of a significant increase in child care funding by the government. And one of the discussion points we had was a lot of students said, well, what do I include on the micro side and what do I include on the macro side? So that's what I wanted to talk about to you in this video. What about 3 micro effects of increased spending? Now, micro, you're thinking about prices, output, profits, the impact on individual firms and households, and also market failure. So we decided that externalities in the market failure aspect was a good one to choose. Consider, for example, the possible underconsumption of childcare if there are external benefits, if there are positive externalities, and childcare is assumed to have some of the features of a merit good. So good quality, and that's an evaluation point, and affordable childcare can improve social skills, social interactions, can accelerate brain development amongst the young, which ultimately can affect employability and productivity. And good nutrition in childcare facilities can also have external benefits, not just the people concerned, but the wider social aspect as well. I'll come back to the externalities diagram shortly. Another micro aspect is the labour market. So childcare subsidies reduce costs for parents, and that can potentially cause an outward shift in the labour supply curve for occupations such as health and social care. Many employers, by the way, do find skills shortages and labour shortages are a big problem, in part because thousands of people, tens of thousands, perhaps even more, cannot afford to work because of the cost of childcare. So childcare subsidies can be justified in terms of relieving labour shortages and ultimately improving delivery of public services to people. And then there's a kind of classic micro approach, subsidy to childcare providers. If you're subsidising the nursery, for example, lowers their variable costs, which in theory should cause them to reduce their price level, the prices they charge. In theory, that could cause an expansion of demand for places, high levels of profit, and falling prices, of course, might lead to high consumer surplus for working families. And there's a supply and demand diagram you can use for that. What I'm saying here is that if you get this kind of question, any focus on market failure, the labour market, price, output, profit, consumer surplus, etc., is micro. And in most examples, you just choose one micro aspect and develop it. Here's the kind of underconsumption market failure diagram for a product with a positive externality from consumption, where social benefit, MSB, lies above private benefit. And in the absence of some sort of subsidy, the private equilibrium is Q1, where private cost and benefit meet, whereas the social equilibrium is at Q2, there's an underconsumption. And as a result, there's a deadweight welfare loss equal to the area A, B, C. So you can make a case for saying that there is an argument for the government to try to address underconsumption, for example, through a subsidy. And a subsidy, if I just strip out some of the writing there, a subsidy might have the effect of lowering the private cost to the consumer or to the provider, and that might encourage the private optimum to shift to Q2, where marginal private cost meets marginal private benefit. So that would be a diagram you could draw to support your analysis point about the micro case, if you like, for a subsidy for childcare. Now, what about macro? This is a little synoptic video. What about the macroeconomic effects of increased spending on childcare? Well, here, of course, we need to be talking about the whole economy. So when we broaden things out to macro, we talk about aggregate effects, don't we? What approach? We think about the supply side. So a childcare subsidy might, over time, lead to an expansion of the UK's active labour supply, particularly encouraging more working mothers perhaps to become more economically active and look for part-time, full-time work. Childcare is a barrier to employment. So if you get it right, it can bring down structural unemployment, as well as the long-term effects of improved nutrition and brain development amongst the young. So in theory, childcare, if you get it right, if you get the funding in place and you make sure that there's enough childcare out there, that can have a quite positive effect on aggregate supply. It also, of course, affects aggregate demand. It's an increase in government spending. I think the extract said just under £4 billion. Well, if we increase it to £8 billion, you're adding directly to aggregate demand. It's a fiscal stimulus that can have multiplier effects, particularly if it leads to an increase in employment in labour-intensive sectors such as childcare. And then there's kind of another aspect, any macro effect, you can talk about the wider fiscal consequences. So a £4 billion subsidy is, well, in the wider scheme of things, it's not huge, but it's not insignificant. How is it financed? Is the government borrowing the money to pay for the childcare subsidy, or is it taking it out of higher taxes elsewhere? That's going to have an effect, isn't it, on the overall fiscal consequence. You can make a case for saying that childcare subsidies are partly self-financing. So you spend money now on the subsidy, but you may well get some of it back if you're the government because the labour supply expands and there's more people in work and unemployment comes down. Does this extra money crowd out the private sector, which has consequences if there's £4 billion less to spend on other public services such as social care? Or does spending more today on childcare mean that, for example, families make a lower claim on the welfare state, particularly if they start working, therefore they make a reduced claim for universal credit, for example? Either way, you can discuss all these things, of course, as part of the assessment. But here are three macro effects. Supply side, jobs and aggregate demand, and the fiscal side are all macro effects. So there we go. A quick look at what to write about if you get a question on government spending on childcare. Hope you found it useful. If you did, please consider pressing the like button and subscribe to our channel. Loads more essay plans and exam support coming in the weeks and months ahead. So stay curious, stay happy, stay positive, and see you sometime soon.